On the evening of the 18th of October 2018, the Royal Opera House in Covent Garden was lit with the particular warmth that belongs only to opening nights. The Duchess of Sussex arrived in a dark gown, her ears carrying 2 drops of gold and diamonds, pavilion-cut stones that caught the stage light as she turned to acknowledge the crowd. They swung with a quiet assurance as if entirely ordinary. They were not recorded in the royal household. Gift register under entries from the preceding weeks. The earrings and a matching bracelet had been reported by British newspapers as received from the Saudi Crown Prince's office, a gift the press estimated to be worth upwards of £100,000. The documentation existed. The political climate existed. Somewhere between the two, the earrings were fastened and worn before the cameras could find them. Some jewels arrive as gifts, others arrive as questions. Subscribe if you want the documented history behind these earrings and what the palace chose not to say. The gift arrived in the weeks before the world knew to look. During the preparation for Harry and Meghan's official overseas program in the autumn of 2018, diplomatic correspondence and protocol gifts moved through the standard channels of the royal household. Among them, entered into the royal household gift register, as required by standing protocol for items above a declared value threshold, were a pair of drop earrings and a matching bracelet. Their combined worth reported by the British press at upwards of £100,000. British press reporting identified the source as connected to the office of Mohammed bin Salman, Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, a detail the palace neither confirmed nor denied. Diplomatic gift-giving between the Saudi royal family and the British crown was not unusual. It was in fact a centuries-old language, one in which gold and gemstones functioned as nouns and the act of giving functioned as syntax. 2018, Mohammed bin Salman had emerged as the most visible and assertive face of a new Saudi Arabia. Bold in his economic reform agenda, celebrated in certain Western circles as a modernizer and cultivating relationships with European and American institutions with deliberate energy. Royal tour and diplomatic exchanges provided the natural theater for this cultivation. The earrings' gold pave set with diamonds fashioned as elongated drops that moved with the wearer were beautiful in the uncomplicated sense of the word. Their craftsmanship reflected the high standards expected in Gulf jewelry commissions. On the register, they were a line item in the hands of a duchess preparing for a public life. They were something else entirely. On October 2, 2018, Jamal Khashoggi walked into the Saudi consulate in Istanbul and did not walk out. A journalist, a former Saudi government advisor, a columnist for the Washington Post, whose criticism of the Crown Prince had made him, by his own documented account, increasingly cautious, he had come to collect paperwork for an upcoming marriage. Turkish intelligence officials would later state that he was killed inside the consulate. The Saudi government's account shifted across several days before it settled on an admission of death inside diplomatic premises, a claim that satisfied almost no one. Within 72 hours, the story had overtaken every diplomatic channel through which Mohammed bin Salman had been building credibility. Western governments, including the United Kingdom, faced immediate pressure to respond. Statements were issued. Intelligence assessments were requested. In the weeks that followed, the UN Special Rapporteur opened an inquiry. The United States Senate passed resolutions directly implicating the Crown Prince in Khashoggi's death. In London, the machinery of royal protocol continued to turn. The gift register had already been filed. The earrings existed in a drawer somewhere in Kensington. Palace documented, logged, received from the same office, now at the center of a global accountability crisis. There is no public record of any internal discussion at the palace about whether to remove those items from active use. No guidance was issued. No advisory was recorded. The earrings remained where they were, small, silent, and waiting. 16 days after Khashoggi's death, the Duchess of Sussex was photographed at the Royal Opera House in Covent Garden, attending an evening performance as part of a cultural engagement. The earrings were at her ears, the same gold drops, the same small diamonds catching the light above the dress circle. She wore them with a composed ease as one wears something entirely unremarkable. The British and international press did not identify the earrings that evening. Identification came later when photographs were cross-referenced against known diplomatic gift records and press coverage of the Saudi royal family's gifting practices. Once the connection was made public, the sequence became stark. A gift from the Saudi Crown Prince's office, a murder, a public appearance, and a silence between all three that the palace declined to fill. No spokesperson for the Duke and Duchess of Sussex commented on the choice of earrings. No statement acknowledged either the gift's reported origin or its timing relative to the Khashoggi case. The Saudi embassy in London issued no clarification. The palace's communications office, then still managing media relations for the Kensington household, confirmed no internal conversation on the matter. What remained was the image, a duchess in a darkened theater, diamonds swinging gently as she leaned forward to applaud, entirely unaware or required to appear unaware of the weight those small stones carried by then. Whether the silence was chosen or inherited, it said as much as any statement could have. The British Crown has long understood that what a royal wears in public is never incidental. From the TUDA period onward, monarchs and their households used jewelry to communicate alliances, signal grief, and perform legitimacy before audiences who could not read proclamations, but could read gold. Mary I of England wore jewels associated with her mother, Catherine of Aragon, in a gesture historians have interpreted as an assertion of dynastic legitimacy during a contested reign. Victoria wore jet and black enamel for decades after Albert's death in 1861. A public performance of mourning that was simultaneously a political statement about grief and power. The language was consistent. What sits at the ear or throat of a royal figure carries meaning beyond the jewel itself. By the 20th century, the grammar had formalized. Diplomatic gifts received from foreign heads of state, entered in the official register, assessed for value and provenance became a specific category of royal adornment, governed by cabinet office guidance and long-standing protocol. Above a stated threshold, gifts were logged and not retained for personal use without approval. Below that threshold, discretion applied. The precise handling of items above the threshold, whether to wear them, to display them, or to deposit them in the royal collection, remained at the discretion of the household and its advisors. What that discretion had never been designed to manage was the wearing of a gift from a foreign leader implicated in an internationally condemned killing within weeks of the event without comment. The protocol was built for ceremony. It was not built for this particular kind of silence. The earrings sitting at the threshold between adornment and statement fell into a gap that no guidance had anticipated. The formal rules governing gift acceptance by members of the royal family are publicly available in outline if not in granular detail. The Cabinet Office Guidance on Government Gifts states that items above a declared value cannot be retained personally. They are either surrendered to the Crown Estate, placed in the royal collection, or purchased at assessed value by the recipient. For working members of the royal family, similar principles apply with individual households, maintaining their own gift registers to ensure accountability and transparency. These registers, however, are not publicly released. What appears in them, except which gifts were received from whom at what assessed value, and what disposition was recorded, remains internal to the household. The public knows they exist because the principle is documented. The public does not know what they contain because disclosure is not required. In the case of the Saudi earrings, what is not documented is equally significant. There is no public record of any member of the Kensington Palace team seeking guidance on the wearing of the items. Once the Kashoggi story broke, there is no documented advisory issued by the Buckingham Palace Communications Office to the Kensington household, which was by late 2018 already operating with a degree of institutional friction that would later be extensively documented. There is no evidence that the question was raised with the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, whose remit included monitoring the diplomatic sensitivities of royal engagements. Protocol exists to serve the institution. One commentator on royal affairs noted at the time, not to protect the individual wearing it. The gap between what the protocol required and what it produced in this instance was the silence that followed the photographs. By October 2018, the Duchess of Sussex had been a working member of the royal family for less than 6 months. She had married Prince Harry in May of that year, and the transition from private individual to public royal had been, by multiple documented accounts, significantly more abrupt than expected. In the 2021 interview with Oprah Winfrey, the Duchess spoke of not having been adequately prepared for the institutional role she had entered, describing a sense of absence rather than negligence, and absence of guidance from those whose role was to provide it. The book Ending Freedom, written by Omid Scobie and Carolyn Durand, and published in 2020, documented the communication tensions between the Kensington Palace team and the wider palace operators during this period. The two households were not in practice operating as a single coordinated institution. Decisions about the Sussexes' public profile were contested by competing communications priorities, and in some instances, made without full consultation. Whether the Duchess was informed that the earrings at her ears had been reported as received from the office of Mohammed bin Salman, and that Mohammed bin Salman had by that October evening become the central figure in a murder investigation of international consequence, is not documented in any public record. It is not confirmed either way. What can be documented is the context. A duchess newly embedded in an institution whose advisory architecture she has since described as incomplete. Wearing a gift whose provenance the institution chose not to address. The earrings caught the light. The question remained. The identification of the earrings unfolded gradually in the way that such things typically do in the digital press environment of 2018. Photographs from the Royal Opera House engagement circulated in the royal press. Separately, coverage of diplomatic gift-giving practices connected to the Saudi royal family had intensified in the weeks following the Khashoggi killing, when journalists cross-referenced the jewelry against known gift descriptions. The connection became reportable. Several British and international outlets published the timeline in the days that followed. The gift received, the murder on October 2nd, the appearance at the Opera House. The gap between those events was presented as its own indictment or in more measured coverage as an institutional failure deserving scrutiny. Some accounts placed the wearing at 16 days after the murder. Others cited a slightly different date, reflecting the ambiguity in the photographic record. The discrepancy was minor. The underlying story was not. The palace's response was consistent. No comment. Neither the Kensington Palace communications team nor the Central Buckingham Palace press office issued a statement addressing the hearings, their reported origin, the timeline, or the guidance, if any, that had been sought or provided. The Saudi embassy did not issue a clarification. Questions were raised in press commentary and political circles in the weeks following identification of the earrings, though no formal inquiry was opened. The earrings did not appear again in the Duchess's public appearances thereafter, at least not in any photograph that was identified as such. Their disappearance from view was in its own way as deliberate seeming as their original appearance, a quiet withdrawal that resolved nothing and explained nothing. The word cover-up appeared in the coverage, though not in the language of any official inquiry. What the term attempted to describe was a specific kind of institutional inaction, not the creation of a false record, but the failure to produce a true one. The palace had a gift register. The press had photographs. Between those two documented facts was a space in which no statement had been made, no advisory had been recorded, and no guidance had been issued, at least none that had been made public. Parliamentary questions touched on the matter in the weeks following the press coverage, addressing whether the palace had been aware of the gift's reported origin before the earrings were worn, and whether guidance had been sought from the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. No formal inquiry was opened. The answers when they came were brief, and they confirmed only that the standard gift protocol had been followed. Comparable precedents in diplomatic gift controversy existed. In prior years, concerns had been raised about jewelry received by members of European royal households from foreign leaders later implicated in human rights violations. In each case, the institutional response confirmed receipt and protocol compliance, with no engagement with the symbolic weight of public wearing. The pattern was not unique to the British Crown. What was particular to this case was the visibility of the wearer, the timing, and the global scale of the underlying event. One political commentator observed at the time that it was not clear protocol and conscience had been treated as the same obligation. The earrings themselves, as physical objects, remain incompletely documented in the public record. No jeweler has been publicly named as their creator. No gemological record has been released. What the press coverage established through photograph and comparative reporting was their approximate character. Gold settings, diamond pavework, elongated drop form. The craftsmanship visible in the photographs was consistent with the high-end golf jewelry tradition. Commissions produced for royal and diplomatic gift-giving at this level tie. Pickley draw on established luxury houses with strong Gulf client bases. Though none confirmed their involvement in this specific piece, the diamonds themselves, visible as small brilliant cuts set in the body of each drop, refracted the stage light in the way that well-cut stones always do. A shimmer that is simultaneously a fact of physics, and in the context of this particular evening, a fact of politics. The gold caught warmth from the house lighting. The earrings moved. Auction house comparables cited in press coverage at the time placed the set earrings and bracelet in the range, consistent with a significant diplomatic commission. The specific valuation remains a press estimate, not a verified figure from any official record. What can be said with certainty is this. The object that appeared at Meghan's ears that autumn evening had been made somewhere by someone and given with intent. The intent of the giver, the knowledge of the wearer, and the silence of the institution that logged them. Those three things are the provenance that matters most. The gemstones were incidental. The chain of custody was not. The earrings did not exist in isolation. By October 2018, the United Kingdom had approved arms export licenses to Saudi Arabia worth billions of pounds, covering equipment used in the Yemen conflict, a matter of sustained scrutiny by the parliamentary committees on arms export controls, which had repeatedly questioned the adequacy of oversight. The political relationship between London and Riyadh was one in which financial and strategic interests operated with a consistency that periodic public discomfort had not disrupted. Royal soft diplomacy, the visits, the gifts, the carefully managed appearances at cultural events was one thread in that larger fabric. It had always served a function to personalize diplomatic relationships, to create channels of goodwill that official negotiations could not easily replicate, and to signal through ceremony a warmth that government statements might be too measured to convey directly. The Queen had received state guests from regimes across the spectrum of international respectability. The royal family had worn gifts from donors whose records were complex. This was not new. What the Kashoggi case made visible was the cost of that function, the point at which soft diplomacy's capacity for silence becomes indistinguishable from complicity. The earrings were one small data point in a much larger equation, but they were visible. They caught the light. And the light in this case was a media environment in which every diplomatic gesture was being read against the background of a consulate in Istanbul and a journalist who had not come home. In January 2020, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex announced their intention to step back from their roles as senior working members of the royal family. The Sandringham Summit, a meeting between Harry and senior royals, including the Queen, produced a formal agreement for their transition. By the spring of 2020, they had relocated to North America. The formal separation from the institution was completed in early 2021. The earrings were not mentioned in any of the documentation surrounding this transition. They do not appear in the publicly released terms of the departure agreement. They were not listed in any auction catalog or charitable donation record. They have not been identified in any subsequent public appearance. Their location, whether they remain in private possession, were returned to the royal household, or sit unmarked in storage, is not a matter of public record. Absence in royal jewelry, history has its own vocabulary. Pieces that disappear from view after a significant event are not simply forgotten. They become part of the documentary silence, present in the register, absent from the portrait, neither confirmed nor denied. The earrings occupy that category now. They were worn once in a context that made them permanently significant, and then they were not worn again. What that absence means, restraint, regret, or simply the practical ending of a public role, is not documented. It is in the language this story has been telling from the beginning, a question left without an answer. The earrings have been read through two primary interpretive frames since their identification, and neither has been entirely comfortable. The first is the frame of institutional failure. A newly embedded member of the royal family inadequately briefed wearing a diplomatic gift from a donor, who had become in the weeks between receipt and wearing the subject of an international accountability crisis. In this reading, the earrings exposed not personal complicity, but systemic negligence, an advisory architecture that prioritized protocol compliance over ethical consideration, and a communications apparatus that chose silence because silence carried fewer short-term costs than any available alternative. The second is the frame of symbolic weight without agency. The Duchess as a figure asked to carry at the literal level of her body, at the level of public visibility, a meaning she had not chosen and was not equipped to navigate. Post-colonial and feminist readings of this period have noted the particular burden placed on Meghan as a figure already subject to disproportionate scrutiny, asked to perform a symbolic function in an institution she has since described as leaving her without sufficient support. Neither frame is complete. Both are documented in parliamentary records, in memoirs, in the institutional record that stretches from a gift register to a formal separation agreement. The earrings sit at their intersection. In retrospect, the observation was almost inevitable. On paper, it had been a gift. In practice, it had been something no one in the institution had chosen to name. In the gift register of the royal household for the autumn of 2018, there is an entry, 2 lines, perhaps 3, a description, a value, a source. The register is not publicly available. What it contains in its full unedited form is not known outside the institution that holds it. What is known exists in photographs. A duchess at the Royal Opera House. The diamonds at her ears moving with a small, precise swing as she turns toward the stage. The crowd around her is absorbed in the performance. No one in that image appears to be thinking about Istanbul. The earrings catch the light the way diamonds always do, indifferent to context, radiating simply because of what they are made of. The clasp on each earring is still fastened somewhere in a drawer perhaps, or a velvet-lined case that has not been opened in years. The gift register notation has not been updated in any record the public can access. The Royal Opera House program from that evening, if it survives in an archive, makes no mention of what was worn. And the question that the earrings posed about knowledge and silence, about the distance between protocol and conscience, about who bears the weight of a gift that should never have been fastened, remains exactly as open as it was on the evening of October 18, 2018, when the stage lights came up and 2 small diamonds caught the warmth of the room and gave nothing away.